How my brother's birthday dinner changed our relationship forever. Reddit relationships. Welcome to Silent Wars. In today's video, we dive into a deeply emotional Reddit relationship story about a man who has spent years helping his family, only to realize he's been taken for granted. As the tension builds, he makes a life-changing decision to stand up for himself and reclaim his peace. If you've ever felt overlooked or unappreciated, this story might resonate with you. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Silent Wars for more thought-provoking Reddit relationships content. David, a 28-year-old accountant, had always been the dependable one in his family. Growing up, he was the fixer, the one who was always called upon when someone needed help. Whether it was his younger sister Jessica asking for a loan to cover her shopping spree, or his older brother Sam needing advice on life decisions. David's role as the family's problem solver became ingrained in him at a young age. He never really questioned it. In fact, it made him feel needed. It was a role he found purpose in. Whenever something went wrong, it was David who stepped in to make it right. As the years went by, though, that sense of purpose began to shift into something else. At first, David didn't mind being the go-to person. Helping out made him feel connected to his family. He was proud of being the one his relatives could count on, the one who could always offer practical advice, lend a hand, or provide financial assistance when they were in a tight spot. He thought this was what family did for each other. But soon, that feeling of importance began to fade, replaced by an overwhelming sense of exhaustion. David's life was beginning to feel like a series of demands rather than genuine connections. His younger sister, Jessica, constantly turned to him for money, even when it was clear she had a spending problem. It wasn't uncommon for her to call David after buying yet another expensive item she couldn't afford, asking for help with rent or to cover her credit card bills. And it wasn't just Jessica. Sam, his older brother, began to rely on him for emotional support and guidance in his life decisions. Whether it was navigating career choices or relationship advice, Sam always found his way back to David, expecting him to drop everything to fix whatever was wrong. At first, David didn't mind helping. It felt good to be the one everyone could lean on. But as time passed, he started noticing a disturbing pattern. Every time Jessica or Sam came to him with a problem, they expected him to drop everything to solve it, without ever offering anything in return. His life seemed to revolve around their needs, while his own went largely ignored. What's worse, it wasn't just their problems that David was solving. He often found himself doing things for them that they should have handled themselves, picking up the slack when they failed to follow through on commitments or responsibilities. David had become the family's unpaid servant, their emotional crutch, and he couldn't shake the feeling that his own needs were being swept aside. He felt as though his worth to the family was measured only by how much he could do for them, rather than being appreciated for who he was. The more he gave, the less he received. Over time, he began to resent the role he had been forced into, but it was difficult for him to break out of it. After all, family was supposed to stick together, right? But as the years went by, the exhaustion began to outweigh any sense of pride or fulfillment. David found himself constantly drained, not only by the physical demands of helping, but also by the emotional toll it took. The more he gave, the more it seemed that his family's expectations grew, leaving him with little energy to focus on his own life or dreams. It wasn't just about the financial support or advice anymore. David had become a stand-in for every problem, a symbol of reliability, without any recognition or gratitude. David's heart began to break each time Jessica and Sam came to him with their problems, because deep down, he knew he was losing a piece of himself in the process. The role of fixer was suffocating him, and as much as he loved his family, he felt like he was losing his identity. He was no longer just David, he was the one who fixed everything, no matter the cost to his own well-being. The exhaustion was starting to take its toll, and David knew he had to make a change. But as the calls from Jessica and Sam piled up, and the demands grew. David found himself at a crossroads, wondering if he had the courage to set the boundaries that had long been missing. The fear of disappointing his family was paralyzing, but he realized that if he didn't take control of his own life soon, he would lose the person he once was in the process. David had always shared a close bond with his older brother Sam. Growing up, they were more than just brothers. They were best friends. Sam was the carefree, adventurous type who could always be counted on for a laugh, while David was the steady, reliable one who could be trusted to get things done. Together, they made a perfect balance. But everything changed when Sam got married. At first, David was happy for him. He had always dreamed of Sam finding someone who could make him happy, someone who could match his energy. And when Sam introduced Sophie, his new wife, David was hopeful that this would be the next chapter in their lives, one where their bond would continue to grow, even as Sam entered this new phase of his life. But soon, David began to notice something that left him feeling hurt and sidelined. Sam, the brother he once shared everything with, was now consumed by his own life. He had responsibilities now: a wife, a home, and all the things that came with adulthood. But what frustrated David the most was that Sam seemed to forget who had always been there for him. Sam no longer had time for the late-night talks they used to have. Instead, David found himself isolated, left to deal with everything on his own. Sophie, Sam's wife, played a big role in the growing distance. At first, David tried to get along with her, but her attitude made it difficult. It wasn't overtly hostile, but there was a subtle sense of superiority that Sophie carried with her, especially when it came to how she treated David. Whenever the three of them were together, Sophie had a way of making David feel invisible. It was as if he no longer mattered in Sam's life, as if the bond they once shared had been replaced by this new, small family unit. David started to feel like an outsider, a shadow in a world where he once stood at the center. The frustration began to build within David, but he kept quiet, convincing himself that this was just part of the inevitable family dynamics. After all, Sam was married now, and things change when people settle down. Everyone kept telling David that this was normal, that Sam was just adjusting to his new life, but deep down, David couldn't shake the feeling that he was being replaced. It wasn't just the lack of communication. It was the way Sophie seemed to take precedence in every situation. Sam used to turn to David for advice, for support, and for help when life got tough. But now, it was always Sophie's opinion that mattered. When Sam needed something, it wasn't David he reached out to. It was Sophie. David began to feel like an afterthought, as if his role in Sam's life had been diminished to that of an accessory, someone who could be relied upon only when necessary. David tried to maintain a sense of patience, telling himself that this was just a phase, that Sam would come around once he settled into married life. But each passing day only made David feel more alone. The frustration, the hurt, and the loneliness started to take their toll. David had given so much of himself to his family, always the one who was there when anyone needed him. But now, it felt like his presence wasn't even valued. What once felt like a strong, unbreakable connection with his brother was now strained, and David felt the weight of that shift more than he cared to admit. As the days went on, David found himself more and more resentful. Sam's absence in his life became more pronounced, and with Sophie in the picture, it seemed like there was no place left for David in his brother's world. Yet, he stayed silent, convincing himself that this was just how family dynamics evolved. But deep down, David knew something had changed. And with each passing day, that change became harder to ignore. David had always thought of family events as a way to reconnect, to reaffirm the bonds that had tied him to his loved ones. But the night of his brother Sam's 30th birthday party was about to change everything. When Sam invited him, David had felt a glimmer of hope that maybe this would be an opportunity to rebuild the fractured relationship. Sam had always been the center of the family, and despite the growing distance, David still held on to the belief that deep down, his brother cared. The party was being held at a luxurious venue in downtown Chicago, one of those places with glittering chandeliers and polished wooden floors, the kind of venue that screams success. Sam had spared no expense for the night, and David couldn't help but feel a little out of place as he made his way into the grand lobby. He had dressed up for the occasion, wearing his best suit and even bringing a high-end gift, an expensive watch that Sam had been eyeing for months. The anticipation of seeing his brother and being part of the celebration filled David with mixed emotions. Maybe this was the night that things would be set right. But when David arrived early, he immediately felt a sense of unease. The grand ballroom was adorned with extravagant decorations, and everything was meticulously planned out. There were assigned seats at the tables, name cards neatly placed in front of each setting. David wandered through the room, his eyes scanning the tables, but something didn't sit right. As he carefully checked the seating arrangements, he realized his name wasn't on any of the cards. His stomach dropped. Panic crept up his spine. It wasn't just the absence of his name, it was the realization that this might not be an accident. He stood there, frozen for a moment, unsure of what to do next. Trying to calm himself, David chose to stand by the bar, hoping someone would explain away the error. He told himself it was a misunderstanding, that maybe the seating chart was being adjusted, and that soon enough someone would come to him and say, "Don't worry, here's your seat." But as the minutes ticked by and more guests arrived, the knot in his stomach tightened. The room filled with laughter, chatter, and the clinking of glasses. Still, no one approached David. Eventually, he spotted Sophie, his brother's wife, who was talking with a group of friends near the front of the room. She looked up and gave him an overly cheerful greeting, but something in her smile felt forced. The warm welcome he had hoped for wasn't there. Sophie's smile never quite reached her eyes. David walked up to her, trying to keep his voice steady. "Hey, Sophie, I don't see my name on the seating chart. Is there a mistake?" he asked, trying to remain calm despite the growing frustration inside him. Her response was cold and dismissive, a stark contrast to the friendly tone she had tried to put on. "Oh, yeah, we had to prioritize the important guests," she said flatly. David's heart sank. The words hit him like a punch to the gut. Important guests. He was family. But in that moment, he realized he wasn't even considered important enough to be seated with the others. Sophie's words stung, and the humiliation he felt in front of a room full of people was unbearable. His own brother's wife had just made him feel insignificant, like an afterthought. David stood there, rooted to the spot, as the weight of the situation settled in. He had always been there for Sam, always gone the extra mile to help, and now, at his own brother's birthday celebration, he was being treated like an outsider. The tears of frustration, the years of feeling undervalued rushed to the surface. The moment he had hoped would bring them together had only pushed him further away. He was no longer just a disappointed family member. He was a man who had finally reached his breaking point. The sting of exclusion burned deep, and as David stood there, feeling the eyes of the other guests on him, he realized he had had enough. The weight of years of playing the dependable one, the fixer, had finally taken its toll. And this night, this seemingly innocuous birthday party had become the tipping point. David's frustration had been simmering for years, and now, standing in the middle of his brother Sam's lavish birthday party, it finally boiled over. He couldn't take it anymore. The constant feeling of being overlooked, dismissed, and undervalued by the very people he had always been there for had pushed him to his breaking point. He had always been the one to pick up the pieces for Sam, whether it was lending money, offering advice, or putting in the effort to support his brother when no one else would. But this was too much. Without a second thought, David walked straight to the front of the room where Sam was sitting with his friends, enjoying the party. It didn't matter to him anymore who was watching. He was done pretending like everything was fine. He had let it slide for so long, burying his anger under the weight of family loyalty. But now the resentment he had kept bottled up for so many years surged to the surface. "Why am I sitting at the back?" David demanded, his voice cutting through the noise of the party. "I'm family." His words hung in the air, sharp and demanding. Sam, who had been casually talking with his friends, barely looked up from his conversation. He didn't even seem to register the weight of what David had just said. "Come on, David, it's not a big deal," Sam replied dismissively, as if David's feelings were irrelevant. That was the moment David snapped. For the first time in years, he stopped holding back. The frustration that had built up from years of being treated like an afterthought finally found its voice. He had had enough of Sam's indifference, enough of being taken for granted, and most importantly, enough of being treated like he didn't matter. With his pulse quickening and his fists clenched at his sides, David's voice rose, filled with anger and hurt. "You know what, Sam?" He shot back, the words spilling out faster than he could think. "You've taken me for granted for years. You've always relied on me for everything: money, advice, favors. And yet, when it comes time for you to show up for me, I get shoved to the back like I'm some kind of nobody. I've been there for you through thick and thin. And this is how you repay me?" The room fell silent. Conversations died down, and every pair of eyes in the room shifted towards David and Sam. The tension was thick. David wasn't backing down now. This wasn't just about a seat at the table. It was about years of being ignored, being the family's unpaid assistant, and being treated like his presence didn't matter. He was done playing the part of the family doormat. Sam shifted uncomfortably in his chair, a mix of surprise and annoyance on his face. But David could see the flicker of guilt in his brother's eyes. For the first time, Sam was confronted with the full weight of his actions, and he didn't know how to respond. The silence between them stretched on, heavy and suffocating, as everyone around them waited for Sam to speak. But Sam didn't seem to get it. "David, stop making a scene," he said, his tone cold and condescending. "You're being dramatic. Just sit down and enjoy the party." David's heart raced, but this time he wasn't going to back down. "No," he said firmly, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "I'm not sitting down. Not until I get the respect I deserve. You don't get to treat me like this anymore. I'm done being your backup. I'm done being the one you call whenever you need something, and I'm done letting you walk all over me." Sam's face reddened, and the room was filled with whispers as everyone took in the intensity of the confrontation. David had finally stopped letting his brother walk all over him. For the first time in his life, he was standing up for himself, and he wasn't about to let Sam or anyone else diminish his worth. The moment was cathartic, as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. David wasn't just confronting Sam. He was confronting years of built-up frustration, disappointment, and emotional exhaustion. Sam, still stunned, didn't know how to respond, but David wasn't waiting for an apology or justification. He was done. David could feel his heart pounding in his chest, his body trembling with a mixture of adrenaline and liberation. This was it, the moment he had been building towards for years. He had been the dependable one, the family member who could always be relied on, but it was never reciprocated. He had watched as his family, and especially his brother Sam, took him for granted, using him as a crutch, while never once offering anything in return. But tonight, all of that was coming to an end. The lavish birthday party, which had initially seemed like a simple family celebration, had turned into the catalyst for David's long-awaited reckoning. His frustration, his pain, and his quiet resentment had all boiled over in that one moment of confrontation. Standing in front of Sam, calling out his neglect, David felt a powerful sense of clarity. He was done being the one who always gave and gave, only to be treated like he didn't matter. David's gaze shifted to the small designer watch he had bought for Sam, a thoughtful gift he had picked out after months of searching. It was something he had been proud to give, something that showed he cared. But now, standing in the middle of the room, with all eyes on him, he realized that this was no longer just about a birthday gift. It was about self-respect. Sam didn't deserve this gift. He didn't deserve David's generosity. Not anymore. With a deep breath, David reached into his bag and pulled out the watch. For a split second, he hesitated. Part of him wondered if he should just walk away, leaving Sam to his own devices without saying anything further. But no, that would have been too easy, too forgiving. He was done with the silent suffering, done with always swallowing his pain for the sake of family. He held the watch up, his hand steady, his voice firm. "I thought you'd appreciate this, but I'm taking it back," David said clearly, looking Sam dead in the eyes. The words hung in the air, and in that moment, David could see the shock in Sam's face. Sam's smug confidence faltered. His eyes widened as he realized what was happening. David wasn't just walking away. He wasn't just turning his back. He was taking back what he had given so freely, reclaiming his dignity and his sense of self-worth. For the first time, David wasn't the one standing in the shadows of his brother's life, quietly supporting him. He wasn't the one sacrificing his time and energy just to make sure Sam was comfortable. Tonight, David was making a statement. He was asserting his boundaries, his right to be respected, and his refusal to continue being taken for granted. As he turned and walked away from the table, heading toward the door, David felt a sense of liberation wash over him. The weight of years of frustration, anger, and resentment seemed to lift from his shoulders with each step. He didn't care about the awkward silence that filled the room, the stunned faces of his family, or the judgmental glances that followed him. For the first time in years, David felt free. He wasn't walking away in defeat. He was walking away with his head held high, finally standing up for himself in a way he never had before. The room behind him might have been filled with gasps and whispers, but David was no longer concerned with how his actions would be perceived. He had done what was right for him, and that was all that mattered. The cool night air hit his face as he stepped outside, and for the first time in a long while, David felt a sense of peace settle over him. He had finally liberated himself from the toxic dynamic that had held him hostage for years. As he looked up at the night sky, he realized that he wasn't just walking away from his brother's party. He was walking toward a future where he was no longer anyone's emotional crutch. And for the first time, that future felt full of possibility. After the birthday party, David waited, half expecting to hear from Sam, or at least from someone in the family. But days turned into weeks, and there was nothing, no apology, no attempt to reach out, not even a simple acknowledgement of what had transpired. His phone remained eerily silent, and it slowly dawned on him that they were waiting for him to cave, for him to be the one to reach out first, to offer an apology for standing up for himself. But David wasn't going to be their emotional punching bag anymore. He felt a strange calm settle over him as the silence grew. It wasn't the discomforting quiet that came with feeling guilty or uncertain. It was the quiet of liberation. For the first time in years, David didn't feel the overwhelming urge to please anyone. He had spent so much of his life trying to make everyone else happy, trying to be the dependable brother, the helpful son, the one who took on everyone else's burdens. But now, standing alone in the silence of his decision, he realized something profound. He didn't need to prove anything to anyone. At first, he focused on the small joys, things he had neglected for years. Reconnecting with old friends he hadn't seen in far too long, rediscovering hobbies he had once enjoyed but had given up on in the name of family obligations. He began to take time for himself, exploring new interests, and slowly finding peace in activities that didn't revolve around others' needs. For the first time, he made choices for himself, without considering what anyone else would think or how they would react. It was liberating in a way he hadn't expected. The breakthrough came during one of these moments of reflection. David was sitting alone in his apartment, a quiet evening in, when the thought hit him. He had spent so many years chasing validation from people who never truly respected him. His worth had been tied up in the approval of his family, in the role they had assigned him. He had been their support, their backup, their problem solver. But all the while, they had never seen him as an equal. They had taken him for granted, and he had allowed it because he thought that was what family did, that the sacrifices were somehow supposed to be rewarded with love and respect. But in reality, he had been invisible, his needs and desires pushed aside for the sake of others. In that moment of clarity, David thought about the watch, the one he had bought for Sam, with the hope of showing his brother how much he cared. He had taken it back, and in doing so, he had realized something far more significant than the value of a designer accessory. The watch wasn't just a gift, it was a symbol. It represented the years he had spent sacrificing his own happiness for others. By taking it back, he had reclaimed something far more valuable, his self-worth. David smiled softly to himself. He no longer needed to prove himself to anyone. His peace, his happiness, his ability to live without constantly bending to the demands of his family, that was enough. The weight he had carried for so long, the constant striving to please and to fulfill everyone else's expectations, had lifted. He could finally breathe. And as he thought back on everything that had led him to this moment, he realized that this was the true meaning of freedom. It wasn't about leaving his family behind or severing ties. It was about choosing himself for once, choosing to be the person he wanted to be, without apology. David was no longer the fixer or the go-to guy for everyone else's problems. He was simply David, free, content, and finally at peace. And in that peace, he discovered a new chapter in his life, one where his worth wasn't tied to anyone else's expectations. It was his own, and that was all that mattered. Looking back, David had no regrets. In fact, he felt a deep sense of satisfaction in knowing that he had made the right decision. Standing up for himself wasn't easy, and the weight of it had been heavy at times. But as the weeks passed and the dust settled, he realized that the discomfort and frustration he had felt were nothing compared to the relief he now experienced. He had drawn a line in the sand, set boundaries, and refused to allow his family to treat him as if his needs didn't matter. The journey of standing up for himself had been long overdue. For years, David had been the one to absorb the emotional toll, to give without receiving, to act as the family's emotional crutch. He had always been the dependable one, the go-to person in times of need, but in doing so, he had lost sight of his own value. It wasn't until the birthday party incident that he finally realized how much he had been taken for granted, and how much he needed to reclaim his own life. Family, David had learned, didn't always have to come first, especially if they weren't willing to show him the respect he deserved. For the longest time, he had believed that family should always be his priority, that he was obligated to always be there for them, no matter the cost to his own happiness. But after confronting Sam, after refusing to be humiliated at his brother's birthday, David began to understand that his emotional and mental well-being had to come first. He wasn't a servant. He wasn't a tool to be used when it was convenient for others. He was a person with his own desires, his own needs, and he deserved to be treated with the same respect and consideration he had always shown others. As time went on, David found peace in the silence that followed. Sam never reached out to apologize. At first, that had bothered David. He had hoped that his brother would come to understand what he had done wrong and offer a heartfelt apology. But as the weeks passed, he realized something. He didn't need it. Sam's failure to apologize wasn't a reflection of David's actions, but of Sam's character. And David didn't need validation from someone who had taken him for granted for so long. In fact, David was okay with it. He was finally at peace with the decision he had made. For the first time in his life, he felt free. The freedom wasn't just about not helping his family anymore or putting up with their manipulation. It was about taking back control of his life. It was about recognizing that he didn't owe anyone an explanation for choosing himself. He didn't owe anyone loyalty if they weren't willing to offer it in return. David now saw the importance of boundaries. He had learned that love and respect had to go both ways, that family didn't have the right to take and take without ever giving anything back. In choosing to stop being the family fixer, he had given himself permission to live his life on his own terms. He no longer felt obligated to be there for people who never really saw him or valued him for who he was. Looking at his life now, David saw how much more peaceful it was. He spent more time with friends who valued him, doing things that made him happy, and focusing on his own goals. His sense of self-worth had been restored, and he was no longer weighed down by the resentment he had carried for so long. He had learned that it was okay to step away, to protect his peace, and to live for himself. No, David didn't regret his actions. In fact, he was proud of the choice he made. It had been the first step in his journey to becoming the person he was always meant to be, the person who finally chose himself over the expectations of others. And that, to him, was worth more than any apology. In life, we often find ourselves caught in the role of caretaker or fixer for those around us, especially within our families. We may spend years giving, supporting, and putting others' needs before our own, thinking that love and loyalty require such sacrifices. However, it's important to remember that our own well-being and peace are just as valuable. Setting boundaries is not a sign of selfishness, but an act of self-respect. It's okay to say no, to step back, and to prioritize our own happiness when we realize we've been taken for granted. Family is important, but it should not come at the expense of our mental and emotional health. By learning to recognize our worth and stand up for ourselves, we allow space for healthier relationships, ones built on mutual respect, love, and understanding. It's never too late to reclaim your peace and choose your path, free from the burdens of guilt or obligation. True strength lies in knowing when to let go and when to choose yourself. Life is about balance, and sometimes the best way to show love is by taking care of yourself first, allowing you to be the best version of yourself for those who truly value you. Thank you so much for watching. We hope this video helped you reflect on the importance of setting boundaries and standing up for yourself in Reddit relationship situations. If you enjoyed the story, please like the video and subscribe to Silent Wars for more amazing content. See you in the next one.